Going to talk about academics today because it's something that's come up recently. It's exam season at uni, and when you get in and around that period, sometimes you start to question things, especially doing philosophy. Kind of comes along with the baggage, just how the brain works. What's the problem? What's the frustration? So the frustration is the moment that academics seem to be very shoehorned. Well, what's meant by that? You go through academic stages, right? So, not gonna lie, very, very fortunate in life. Since being adopted, came over to the UK, and was given every opportunity to learn, get a great education. Secondary school, had a private education all the way through sixth form, and then went to a great university, currently at Swansea, and it is, yeah, every opportunity that could be given academically has been given. So this isn't a criticism of the academic structure of the country, but at the same time it kind of is, because there is a structural issue with it. You go from, if you do go through sixth form or college or whatever and end up at university, you get to a point where you start to think, if you're doing something academic, this is just rehashing of other people's thoughts that have already been before you. This is just quoting and referencing and then learning off the backs of other people. How much of it is creative? How much of it is original? And if you try and break that mold, if you try and then be more creative, you get punished slightly. You have to play the game in a very rigid fashion. It's very structured. It's very traditional. It's the UK. That's what is done here. Tradition, structure, and kind of that slight rigidity, which at the one hand is a positive, on the other hand is a big negative when it comes to creativity, especially in academic forms. One of the big pros of the UK has always been the arts. Some of the greatest actors, comedians, musicians, anything along those have come from the UK. And for such a relatively small nation, in terms of population, the output it produces across the world is impressive. And that's the problem with yes academics, is it's so damn rigid. The UK is not academically rich. Certainly hasn't been as rich in the modern day. Why is that? Well, because other countries are simply better at teaching. The structures for academics are better. When you look at comparisons across Europe, the UK is currently on the decline on the academic charts. Why is that? Well, it's again the issues with the structure. And is the issue necessarily, not allowing creativity at the earlier stages, or is it the fact that, well, if you are going to do a subject, doing history, philosophy, and German, right? Got a mate who's doing marine biology, and we were talking earlier today, and we've both got exams, both got coursework, and we're both saying we're basically doing the same thing. Now the topics are completely different. She's researching like bugs, basically. Researching rioting between 1860 and 1910. They are completely different things, right? But the structures of our essay are basically identical. The types of work we're having to do are basically identical. The only difference is, well, the actual filler, really, but the structures are the same. And that really shouldn't be the case across two very, very different subjects, let's be real here. Again, breaking that structure, breaking that rigidity, and coming up with something that's more original, that is actually genuine thought of the individual, becomes more difficult to do because these essay structures have to be catered in a certain way. And of course, you're always going to have to answer a question, because how are you going to, expand knowledge? How are you going to then pass down that knowledge? I mean, that's what humans do. They pass down knowledge, but regurgitating knowledge is useless. Academia shouldn't be regurgitation, it should be originality, and this originality comes through creativity, and it stifles creativity when you're just saying things like, analyze this, and then the analysis comes from, well, okay, there's these facts that have been set out, whether it is, this species hibernates in a certain time of year, and this is their life cycle, or whether it is, well, this is an Old Bailey case of riot in 1872 on the 5th of March, and here's what happened, and here's how many people were prosecuted, and here's the exact events. Regardless of those two events being completely separate, the actual kind of filler, the actual inside of the essay, is ultimately going to be very similar. It's just going to be, oh, look at these facts, and answering the question as directly as possible, because that's what universities want. They don't really encourage thinking outside the box, because they're always like, oh, but then you get lost and you miss the point and you can, kind of divulge, and we don't want that. We want you to just get through it. And that's the problem. You shouldn't be encouraging people just to get the job done. Like, on the one hand, it makes sense, it's pragmatic, but on the other hand, it really stifles any further movement forward. And if you really want to be creative, and creativity is a calling for some reason that is just here, it's so monotonous to be doing this kind of stuff and just saying, answer the question directly, be one touch, two touch, because you get punished if you don't, right? Because it's too abstract or it's too left of field. And when you actually read the essay back, this might sound arrogant, but it all makes sense. It's just the fact that the establishment in place, it's not exactly what they want to hear, so that it kind of becomes problematic. And maybe it's the arrogance of youth. It probably is, but there's a level of discontent here that you have to wait so long to actually make the change, to actually do things. You're in university, if you're doing a bachelor, till 21, 22, that kind of age, right? If you're doing a 3 or 4 year course. And then you kind of get to do your own thing after that, The dissertation's kind of, your own thing if you're doing a dissertation. But it's that, again, that rigidity, that structure. You have to answer questions in a certain way. And then once you get to journal writing, then you can do whatever you want. But academia as a structure, if you think about it, you start learning at, say, 4, and then up till 22 or 21, so it's 18, 17 years, you're just rinsing and repeating what other people have already said. There's no creativity to it unless you're actually doing an art or music or drama or something like that, right? And it is fairly insufferable. What's the answer? Honestly, it might just be to not do it. It might be academia is maybe something that should be in the back burner, or yeah, it's problematic as well, because university is, or certainly perceived to be, the way forward for people. And granted, a lot of people just go to uni to get a degree. They're not necessarily interested in academia. That's absolutely fine. Again, it's pragmatic. It makes sense. But from a creative perspective, from wanting to kind of expand the art of whatever it is, philosophy isn't really an art, granted, but there does feel to be like that level of creativity you have to be a thinker, to actually project your views across. And where these two meet is interesting, personally at least. And having this stifled by just the system that's in place, because it's not the done thing at the moment, or maybe it's not the done thing at all because it's such an old tradition. I mean, philosophy has been going back since the ancient times, right? And basically the form of philosophy that's currently learned is the same system they were using in the kind of late Enlightenment period. Certainly the way it's taught, and certainly the kind of slightly stiff upper lip approach that is present in modern philosophy is very much that. And yeah, does beg the question, is it stifling creativity? Personally think it does. And yeah, it's a cause for frustration. Again, it might be arrogance. You might think it is. You might also say, well, why don't you just do a degree and creative stuff on the side as well? And yeah, that's currently what's happening too. But yeah, it's a shame not being able to kind of do those two things at once and kind of get the satisfaction from academia in the kind of more direct sense, and being punished certainly institutionally for wanting to be creative. And yeah, there's always the comments like, oh, just play the game, be pragmatic while you can, but you can only do that for so long. Again, it's been about, since moving to the UK, a hot minute anyway, basically been doing philosophy all the time in the UK, and yeah, it's getting monotonous. Not the subject, but the way it's taught, the way it's it's marked, the way it's received sometimes. You know, maybe the answer is just to do it more casually, because certainly in the academic fields it's very rigid. It's still very, yeah, again, repetition starting to be used now. So we'll cut this off, end transmission, before it just becomes a rant. Yeah, be interesting to hear your thoughts on this. You can agree. You can certainly disagree. Like, dislike, depending on your viewpoint. That's obviously okay. Yeah, subscribe, do all that kind of good stuff if you enjoy this, if you want to see more. And yeah, that's about it then. All right. Cheers. That's that. Thank you for listening or watching. Bye bye.